Hopefully I caught all of you at the right time today and you are ready to learn. Today I'm going to talk about avoiding some traps to ensure that your life is more productive, whether you're in or out of federal prison. As many of you know, I film a lot of videos about mastering life in federal prison, preparing for sentencing, though a lot of my videos have to deal with just living productively. And the idea for this video, having the courage to avoid these traps, stemmed from two lectures I gave last week, one at Georgetown Law School and another at University of San Diego. And myriad students in the question and answer ask about tendencies that I had in business, and did that lead to my struggles with the criminal justice system? As many of you know, I went to federal prison, and they then want to know, well, how can I learn and better understand my tendencies? If you're watching, I'm not saying that any of you have to make any changes or you're going to fall for any of these traps. This is for those who are looking to learn and grow and not wait until something so significant or severe happens before making a change. And I'll be very transparent. I lacked courage to make the right choices in my 20s, frankly, after graduating from USC, and not having the courage to avoid these traps derailed the life that I felt I was supposed to live. And I frequently said I spent my 30s making up for my 40s, and now I am at 45, hoping to convey and share some lessons with the hopes that it helps all of you, whether you're immersed in the system or not. So what are some of these tendencies or traps? One, my tendency, the disease to please, was a tendency in my 20s that I had to work very hard on in prison. When I lecture at business schools, when I ask clients who are in trouble, potentially going to prison, I'll ask them, do you have this pleasing tendency? And many of them say, yes. Having studied people pleasers, myself included, I can tell you pleasers will often follow through and do something they know is wrong. They know it's wrong, but they don't want to disappoint the person asking them. So for those of you immersed in the system, when you are in federal prison, this tendency you must be aware of. You must work to change it. And practically speaking, for me, upon my surrender to prison, this disease to please sort of continued. Right? I didn't do anything crazy and stupid like using a cell phone. Last week, someone called and said they've been sleeping with a nurse in the camp for 3 weeks. I mean, those are obvious traps and dumb things to avoid, of course. This is more subtle. Upon my surrender, I began to inappropriately form friendships with men who wanted me to walk the track with them and listen to their story. And while sad and heartfelt, it was not in the best interest of my time to walk that dusty track at Taft Prison for 3 or 4 hours, because it got me further away from my goals, which is getting ready to come home stronger and better. I had yet, even in prison, when I got there, yet cultivated the ability to say no. And it wasn't until I had a lot of conversations with my mentor, Michael Santos, who helped me assess and understand how I was serving time in prison, along with my tendencies, that I began to say no and make principled and firm choices. And it was very empowering for me to get away from this pleasing aspect, of finding the power in saying no. So whether you're involved in the system or not, having the ability to say no and recognizing that tendency was transformative for me. And it's part of the reason I say prison was so incredibly productive, because unlike my 20s, I couldn't get steamrolled by making decisions I knew were wrong. And it's really changed my life. One of the many great strategies I put in place, simply saying no. Another tendency or trap that I want all of you to avoid, that I know is really common with my clients, frankly, I'm working with their defense attorneys or their senior partners, is avoiding confrontation. Do not fall for this trap. If someone knows that you do not like confrontation, they're going to push and push and push, and again, sort of roll over, get what they want, because they know that you're cowering. They know that you don't want it. That's part of the reason I lack courage and make terrible choices in my 20s, because when my senior business partner would kind of push, I would avoid. When I wanted a raise, I did it in not the appropriate fashion. I didn't push as hard as I should, even though I worked so hard. And yes, I was already making big money. I felt I was entitled to more. I had earned it. But his response would kind of compel me a little bit to cower. And maybe I was only 22 or 23 at the time. But in retrospect and in prison, I realized that avoiding confrontation is not always the best strategy. Avoid that trap, because if someone knows that it's a tendency of yours, they will find it like a sixth sense and they will exploit it and run all over you. So a benefit to life in federal prison, knowing I lacked the courage in my 20s, was using my time on the inside to hone this skill, to study and read and think, and then put it into practice when faced with dilemmas. All of this only works if you put it into practice when faced with choices. So if you're a pleaser, derive a sense of satisfaction in saying no, whether you're going to prison or not. If you're someone who doesn't like confrontation, test and push yourself, as uncomfortable as it may be, as hard as it may be. And it's only a little window where it may be tough, maybe 3 minutes, 5 minutes, a 10 or 20, 30-minute meeting, but you won't pay for it for the rest of the day, week, month, or year. So it really requires implementing this and making some tough choices, as I began to do, learning to say no. I hear the story where, I think in a blog in prison, I wrote that I'd play baseball at USC. Someone came across the blog, and every day this guy would, hey, come play softball, come play softball. And of course, I don't think you should play softball in prison. It's like 4 days a week. And at first I'm like, no, it's fine. Maybe. Finally, I said, no, I'm not going to be a professional softball player when I get out of here. Stop asking me. Guess what? He never asked me again. Seems like kind of a not so big example, I suppose. But in that case, I wasn't afraid to avoid confrontation. I said no. It's something I should have said weeks earlier, and I got back to my day. For those of you in struggle or going through the criminal justice system, if I were to ask you to identify your values, you would most likely say my family and freedom. So let me convey this to you. If you are in this case, these traps, if you are afraid of confrontation, if you have this disease to please, you are violating your values. You are getting in the way of what you think is most important, or you have identified as being most important to you. Here's a practical example. If you tell your family that you're going to live productively in prison and work and write and think and create a new record and grow your network, so when you come home, you're going to be successful. If you've identified that value with your family, and then you make decisions on the inside of wasting time, of walking the track, of listening to stories, of complaining, of having an inability to say no, or being beholden to somebody else's routine, like being forced to go to softball practice 4 days a week, you are absolutely violating your values. So for me, part of the reason prison was so productive, and the reason that my time in prison was more productive than any time I ever worked as a stockbroker, and all the money that I made, even though I made 15 cents an hour in prison, is because I learned to live faithfully to my values. It was transformative for me. So as an exercise for all of you, to help you understand your tendencies, your idiosyncrasies, your mannerisms, what you tend to do in life, what your default is when faced with struggle or a tough choice, you should write down what your values are. You have them, and then you should look at your day-to-day decisions and question, have you violated any of these values? And to faithfully pursue these values, as I wrap up this video, let me remind you, it will be difficult and hard. In prison, I woke every day at 4 a.m. and I didn't want to. It was miserable. It sucked. I mean, who really wants to get up at 4 a.m.? I went to prison out of shape, overweight. My diet was terrible, and I ran 10 miles a day, whether it was 50 degrees or 110 degrees. Did I enjoy it? No, it was awful. It sucked. It was miserable. I was in the worst mood both before and after the run because it was so awful. But I identified fitness as being of value to me. Getting up at 4 a.m. and reading philosophy and ethics and writing, knowing that someday I could write a book about ethics and get paid by the top business schools across the country or corporations. People called me insane and nuts, but it was a 5-10 year goal of mine, and I wrote it down and I pursued it on days that I didn't want to, which was frankly a lot of days. If you're only going to work on days where you're motivated or you want to, you have a problem. That's a trap you're falling into. And that's how I'm going to wrap up this video. I'm not saying that any of you need to make changes. I know my inability to make changes, my being weak, not having any courage in my 20s led to embarrassing my family, creating victims, destroying my reputation, and of course, losing my freedom. And I wish I had made these changes. I wish I had made these changes. I wish I had implemented and lived faithfully to my values in my 20s. I wish I didn't need such a punch to the face on the wrong side of prison boundaries to get it together. So it's never too late. And that's what Michael Santos said to me in prison, a few months into my prison term, when he realized I was kind of wasting my days with endless fun and exercise. I said, is it too late? And he said to me, the best day to plant an oak tree was 20 years ago. The second best day is today. And that's what I'm going to convey to all of you. If these traps have been a part of your life, avoiding confrontation, an inability to say no, and in so doing, if you're violating your own values, it's time to change. It's time to take ownership, and it requires you working on days that you may not want to, which frankly may be most days. Thank you very much for watching this video. If you found value in it, please subscribe. And if you like this content, maybe you found a home at White Collar Advice, please come back and I'll keep working hard to produce content for you. Be well. Bye-bye.